and welcome to Series 10, Episode 3 of In Suspense, a podcast and vodcast for fans and writers of crime fiction. I'm Nikki Smith, and I'm here today with my co-host Lesley Cara. Hello, Lesley.
Nikki. Hello.
Hi, Lesley. Hello. In our last episode, Lesley and Lauren talked to Lisa Hall about her latest book, The Mysterious Double Death of Honey Black, and the topic of blended genres. But today we're going to be talking to debut author Alex Hay, and the topic is why heists never go out of fashion. So I'm very excited about that, as I love his book. But of course, no In Suspense podcast would be complete without our little catch up. So how have things been with you, Lesley?
I haven't been particularly well. I've had a rotten sort of cold. I thought it might be COVID, but I did a test at the weekend because we were away at the weekend with family. So I tested first just to make sure, but it was negative. So it's obviously some other little virus, but it's laid me low, really. You can probably hear I'm a little bit hoarser than usual. I might actually cultivate a deeper voice. I think I prefer it. But anyway, I don't prefer having this cold, that's for sure. But yeah, so really I've been doing a lot of lying about on the settee, watching TV and reading books. That's always good, isn't it? And thinking about my next novel. And also I've been messing around on the new social media app, or the relatively new one, Blue Sky, and trying to get to grips with it, really, because it's the closest thing I've come to so far to X, formerly Twitter. I don't like calling it X, but that's what it's called now, isn't it? And I think a lot of people are doing what I'm doing, and what I think you're doing as well, aren't you? You'll talk about that in a minute, but sort of keeping the Twitter account open, hoping that things will improve, but more or less resigned to the fact that they probably won't. And migrating. I'm quite enjoying Blue Sky. It's quite similar. There's a few things it can't do, but it's, I know a lot of people think it's a bit exclusive because you have to have a code to start. But I don't think it is exclusive. I think they're just limiting the number of users to start with because it's still in the beta, I don't know how to pronounce that, beta stage, isn't it? So I think they're limiting numbers to try and get those teething problems sorted out. And as soon as I do get codes, I'm looking forward to inviting people on. But I mean, you're on it too, Nikki. What are your thoughts on Blue Sky?
I am. I mean, exactly like you, Lesley. I've joined, but I've also kept my Twitter account open. So, I mean, you're Lesley Cara, I know, on there, and I'm Nikki Smith, author on the new Blue Sky place. And I think, yeah, it's just a question of, I think, waiting to see what happens with it, really. But it is definitely the closest that I've come to anything like Twitter. I joined Threads, I think it is, which was the kind of Instagram spin-off, but that didn't really seem to work particularly well. I don't think there was a lot of engagement. This one seems like there's definitely more engagement on it, so we'll just have to, I think, wait and see what happens, really.
Yes, I joined Threads as well, and I don't think you can unjoin it because it's sort of, are you still on Threads? Because I can't seem to find a way of coming off it without losing my Instagram account.
Yes.
So I'm on Threads, but I don't really do anything on there. But you've been busy. What else have you been up to, Nikki, apart from messing around on Blue Sky? You've been doing other things, haven't you?
I've had a copy edit deadline, which has been fun, I would say. Maybe challenging would be a better word for it. It's been full on, and I have worked my bottom off to get those back. I think that there was a few issues with the timeline, which is always the time that I kind of say thank you to a copy editor. Thank goodness, thank you for a brilliant copy editor. And I've also been dropping my eldest off at university yesterday. So that was packing up her bedroom and transferring it all to somewhere else. So
I remember that time very well. Yeah, I remember that time very well. Yes. It's a sort of bittersweet moment, isn't it? It's lovely that they're off and independent, but at the same time, you're still worrying about them. They're still your baby.
Indeed.
Oh, you're telling us about your copy edits, Nikki. I've actually got my page proofs back now for the my next book, which is now going to be called I think I can announce this. It's not The Vacancy now. It's called The Other Tenant, and we're working on the visuals soon. So hopefully I'll have a book cover to share very soon. I can't wait for that.
When's it out, Lesley?
It's out next April. I can't remember the exact date, but sometime towards the end of next April.
Okay. Oh, exciting. So it's probably time that we got today's guest on. And by the powers of technology, here he is. So welcome to In Suspense. Hey. Welcome, Alex Hay, to In Suspense. Can you do us the honour of introducing yourself to our listeners, please?
Of course, and thank you very much for having me. So, hello, I'm Alex Hay. I am the author of The Housekeepers, which is a historical heist out with a headline this past July. It's my debut. I've been writing for as long as I can remember, that classic author phrase. And yeah, very thrilled to have a book come out this year. This is probably my first time introducing myself, actually. So I will have to polish my bio in due course.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And you should also mention that your amazing book won the Caledonia Novel Award, I think, didn't it? So, yes.
It did indeed. Yeah, thank you for banging the drum for me.
Yes,
I'll be less bashful next time.
There's no room for modesty. There's no room for modesty on this programme.
No, indeed. Quite right.
And can we start by asking you to tell us a bit about your debut novel, The Housekeepers, which both Lesley and I thought was highly entertaining?
Oh, thank you so much. So, of course, I can. The Housekeepers is, as I say, a historical heist, and it's set in London in the summer of 1905 and tells the story of Mrs. King, who is the very charismatic, sharp-witted housekeeper to one of Mayfair's grandest mansions, who, on being unfairly dismissed from her post after many years of loyal service, decides that she is going to enact her revenge by carrying out the most audacious robbery that high society has ever seen. So think big hats, big houses, bad men, brilliant women. And if you cross the Oceans franchise with my old favourite Upstairs, Downstairs, then there you have it.
Oh, that is a fantastic blurb, Alex. I think you've been working on that one, haven't you?
I had to practice my pitch. Yes, I was like, I know I need to get this right. So yes, I've been trying my very best.
Oh no, that's brilliant. And it's certainly, as Nikki said, it certainly is so entertaining. It's really, really fun to read. And I was thinking, what a fantastic concept. And what gave you the idea? What prompted this amazing novel?
Well, I mean, like many people listening to this podcast, and I've been listening to In Suspense for ages, I think all of us who are debuts are not really debuts. We've got lots of books sitting in drawers, and there they should stay. And certainly in my case, there they must stay. I think books I'd written in the past and sent out to agents unsuccessfully were all a bit glum and a bit dour. And when I came up with this idea, I was really just dying to write something fun and something that I would enjoy. So I started this in the summer of 2020, which was, as we can all remember, not the happiest time that we've ever seen. And I was really looking for something that I could just sink into that would feel really escapist to me. So I was dying to write a heist because I think it's a gift structurally, because it's got such clear movements. You gather your team, you throw loads of obstacles their way, you try and pull everything off with as much gusto as you can manage. And that all felt very delicious from a planning and plotting perspective. And I'd been really longing to write something set in the 1900s because the period is really rich for this type of story, because you've got the wonderful period texture of sort of old world Victoriana, coupled with these really quite startling flashes of modernity as the 20th century comes zooming in around the corner. So you're sort of setting aside your carriages, and instead you have your characters driving around in their gorgeous Daimlers. You've got electroliers rather than chandeliers. And all of this felt quite fizzy and febrile within which to set a big old robbery. So I think gluing setting and plot structure together was the starting point for me. And I was quite considered about that. So that was sort of the the germ of trying to then put the story together.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
It is really interesting. Is the 1900s a period you've always been fascinated with?
Yeah, always loved it. And I suppose I sort of had the brand of the Edwardians in my mind for ages. So big hats and rolling lawns and tea gowns and fabulous weekend parties and all the rest of it. And, you know, some of that's been immortalized in things that I loved. I mean, I was the very cool teenager who was taking all the double VHS box sets of Upstairs, Downstairs out of Cardiff County Library. So you can tell the sort of fun-loving teenager I was. So yeah, always loved the era. And I suppose over the years had read more and more around it and had absorbed so much by osmosis. And the architecture of the period has always really fascinated me too. So particularly some of the absolutely glorious houses that were once scattered all across West London have always intrigued me, particularly those that are lost today, either to development or to the Blitz. And starting to think about whether or not I could set my own novel inside one of those really sumptuous mansions. I mean, I think to some extent, the core story I will always want to write is a really big house with a really bad family inside it. And that was the starting point for this book as well. So period and that type of book have always been the things that have lured me in.
And of course, that's sort of the disparity between the wealth upstairs and the poverty and the struggles downstairs is always brilliant to sort of see played out, isn't it, in drama?
Yeah, totally.
Really well.
Yeah, and it's that sort of Robin Hood story, which is, I think, quite archetypal, and we all love and I love. And the characters in my book are stealing from those upstairs in order to seek restitution for those below stairs who deserve it. But in the course of writing the book, playing with some of those dynamics and those tropes and flipping some of those tropes on their head was sort of part of the whole delicious planning process for me. So yeah, I loved it.
Yes, I think your description, Ocean's 11 crossed by upstairs, downstairs, or I was going to say Downton's Abbey, is absolutely spot on, very original. So yeah, well done.
Oh, thank you.
And I think I just stole your question there, didn't I, Nikki? So
you did, but it's fine, Lesley. It's
sorry
fine.
about that. I was so eager to.
You just carry on, Lesley, and I should ask the next one.
Really sorry. Okay, so do you want to tell us about the sort of research that you had to carry out in order to get that historical detail spot on?
Yeah, I mean, I loved the research, and I could have happily spent many months down the research rabbit hole. But I'm quite pragmatic about research in that I was led very much by the story. If I had a character zooming in to a particular scene or room, then I would make sure that I was sort of gathering the detail that I thought was strictly necessary to that scene and to that part of the plot, because I really felt as though I had a sort of clock ticking on this book. I really loved the idea, and I didn't want to wait around too long to get it done. So I tried to be quite disciplined with myself and not get very, very distracted. That being said, there is so much wonderful distraction to be found. So when I was going through archive accounts of houses that were once situated all down Park Lane, I found the most amazing descriptions of the furnishings, of the paintings on the walls, of what the inhabitants were collecting. And I loved that because it gave me a quite pleasing feeling that although the house at the heart of this story is fictional, it's a composite picture of many houses that once did exist across Mayfair, and lots of the small details, such as the chairs or paintings on the walls, will have come from fact. So that was a sort of quite rich vein for me to follow. And I suppose then as the story evolved, I had to do some quite focused research into perhaps the underside of the 1900s, because I mentioned that, you know, I'd sort of always grown up knowing the brand of the Edwardians, but actually as you scratch beneath the surface, you begin to realise the scale of exploitation and corruption faced, particularly by servants, particularly within the service trade. And reading quite thoughtfully and carefully around that was a sort of vein that perhaps I hadn't known I would need to go into so deeply when I started the book. So there were sort of two big buckets of research that I had to do.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I loved your witty and very humorous dialogue in the book. Yeah, it's spot on your language from the first sentence actually. And yeah, I bet the dialogue was great fun to write. But there must have been times when you wrote yourself into a corner with all the twists and turns. So I just wondered, are you a meticulous planner or are you a pantser when you're writing?
It's such an existential question to me at the moment, Nikki. I do not know because I keep changing my process. So for I mean, I could talk about this for hours. For this book, I was an absolute planner. And if you'd spoken to me 2 years ago when I was editing it, I would have said, I cannot write a book without a plan. I don't understand how anyone does. Every time I've tried, it all falls apart around 25,000 words. And for the housekeepers, because when I had the idea, I just loved it and was really itching to write it, but I was also really scared I would mess it up. So I got out my absolutely gargantuan spreadsheet and began planning each scene in minute detail. And therefore, actually, was able to write the first draft quite quickly because I was really just writing it up. But when I went through successive rounds of rewrites, even before I had an agent, and then especially after I was agented and once we had our brilliant editors on board as well, I discovered that, lots of what I put down in the plan didn't really hold up in the story because I sort of laid out my chessboard, moved everybody around, and then forced them to do the things that I'd set out in that planning process. But actually, some of the emotional beats weren't really there. And one of the big things I had to do was sort of go closer and closer to the bone on each round of edits to work out it's all very well to rob a beautiful house from top to toe, but why? And what's the sort of more dense and gripping and interesting story that sits underneath all of that? And that couldn't really come with planning. That just had to come with lots of testing as I go. So in a roundabout way, to answer your question, I was a massive, massive planner, but increasingly I am pantsing with abandon.
That's so interesting because I'm a fellow spreadsheet kind of planner person, but I would totally agree. I think spreadsheets can get you the plot beats, and so you know what's going to happen when. But then I also have to kind of go back and do it almost like all over again when you've worked out who your characters are and why they're doing what they're doing, and that adds a completely different layer and often sends the plan out the window slightly.
Indeed.
So yes. But I do love a spreadsheet. I still love a spreadsheet. So yes.
Maybe I'll stick with mine then. We'll see. I'm debating.
Did either of you see that picture that Claire McIntosh posted on Twitter or X or whatever it is, of her sort of amazing typed out colour coordinated spreadsheet? It looked so meticulous. I was dead impressed.
Yeah, I did. I saw that too. And actually, I'd also listened to Claire McIntosh talking through her process on Honest Authors. And I think the piece she shared that was sort of such an insight to me was mapping the reader's journey alongside what you're seeing on the page. And I've never done that actually. And that to me is such a skill to really be playing that level of tricks with the reader. So
I have that. I have a column for what I want the reader to think. So I have a column for what's going on, and then I have a column for what I want the reader to think when I'm doing it. Yeah, which really helps you, I think, get your brain in the two different spaces. Yeah.
I find it so fascinating because I am the worst guesser of plots ever. My husband is amazing. We can be watching something and he'll say, this is going to happen, then this is going to happen. It's so mad to me because I've read so much at this point. You'd think I would have guessed what the twists and turns were, but I am unfailingly surprised and bamboozled by any twist that is thrown upon me. And therefore, I think I do actually also find it quite hard to plot and plan that out as well. So yes, maybe I'm going to need to try this. My new tricksy column to play fiendish games with the reader.
Alex, in our last episode, we were talking to Lisa Hall and we were talking about hybrid genres. And that was our topic, mixing it up, and in a way we could have had that topic for you as well, because although, heist stories are kind of a subgenre all of their own, aren't they? They often do cross boundaries. So you might have a science fiction heist or a romantic heist, all those sorts of things. But the topic that we did decide on today was why heists why heists never go out of fashion. And so it's quite a huge question to ask you to answer. But why do you think a good heist story never goes out of fashion?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, first of all, I think we're in the heistgeist at the moment
Ooh,
because there's been
I
a
like
glut
that.
of
I
there's been
love
a
that.
glut of heists, and I've been really thrilled to see this. And I, it's wonderful actually to see a sort of particular plot structure really have its day and have its moments. I don't know. I think there's two things going on here. For me, I think the structural beats of a heist lend themselves to really big, juicy, glitzy plots. And who doesn't love that, first of all? But secondly, I think some of the sort of emotional components of a robbery story, which sort of ask you to root for the villain and turn your baddies into goodies and play with what is justice, what is revenge. I think those are really rich veins to play with as well. And I think it probably taps into some sort of wish fulfillment. I mean, I can only speak for myself, but we've all had days at work / in life where we see grand injustice all around us, and we are determined to turn empires on their heads in favor of what we think is right. And I think heist stories play with that. They're asking often ordinary people with extraordinary skills to upend the world in order to chase some particularly fantastic piece of treasure. But that treasure will have some sort of emotional resonance to it that makes the whole engine of the story really personal, make the stakes feel really high. So I think that is, the key ingredient for, in my mind, a great and readable book. And therefore, I think people are sort of discovering that heist structures really lend themselves to this. And I think readers hopefully really respond to that as well. But it's such a good question. I don't 100% know. And I listened to your episode with Lisa talking about genre blending. And I think Lisa said at the end of the day, no matter which genres or sub-genres you're gluing together, it's the story that comes first. And you need to have that story and those key movements just be paramount in your mind. And whatever tropes you're layering over that, having someone who wants and or needs something and is going to get it is the engine in every story, regardless of the window dressing that sits around it. And I really agree with that.
Good answer. I love that. What did you say? Heistgeist. I love that.
Welcome to the
That isn't
Heistgeist.
a term already, then it certainly needs to be. And you're right, because there have been so many heist books. I mean, and C.L. Taylor wrote one, didn't she? Her last one, The Guilty Couple, slightly different because instead of stealing, instead of sort of stealing money or jewels or possessions, it's in that book, it's a wife stealing evidence, isn't it, to prove her innocence. So there's lots of sort of riffs you can play on that heist theme, which is great.
Yes, and I think, of course, what helps make your book so brilliant is the characters and their relationships with each other, kind of before, during, and then after the heist. So it's kind of less of a whodunit. I think heist is more of a how did they do it and what happened afterwards. And you have an amazing ensemble cast of strong, larger than life female characters like Mrs. King. Can you give our listeners a flavour of some of them, please?
Yeah, I love my gang. So Mrs. King is my ringleader. And I think in a heist, it's important that your ringleader is pretty charismatic and quite cool-headed. But it can make them slightly remote and chilly as well. And actually, so it proved to be writing Mrs. King. It was quite hard to get into her heart for a while. But she's surrounded by a group of women who all bring their own particular skills to the party and all have their own private emotional desires and reasons for wanting to rob this beautiful house on Park Lane. So we have our financier, Mrs. Bone, who I like to say is bombastic and bombazine. She's a pretty tough and cantankerous character, but has a heart of gold.
And such a good name. They're really good names. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I love Mrs. Bone. Mrs. Bone was actually two different characters in the first draft that I had to sort of glue together into one very good sidekick with deep pockets to run this quite complicated enterprise. And she was a real joy to write, actually. But another good example of it's fun to have someone who will sort of roar into every scene and throw everything into chaos, but trying to find the sort of subtler reasons for her connection to both Mrs. King and to the other women in the group and to the house itself was a sort of piece of detective work for me. And then around them, I have Hepzibah Grand Court, fading music star and former scullery maid, who is one of my absolute favourites to write. Any scene with Hepzibah is going to have a lot of pace and gumption in it, but again, she has her own personal connections and dark secrets connected to Park Lane that unfold slowly as the book develops. And then I have my probably absolute favourites, which are my trapeze swinging housemaids named by their mistress, Jane 1 and Jane 2. So whether they're on the chimney or scaling the walls or torturing cook, they are there to keep some of the mechanics of the heist moving with all the alacrity that they can muster. And I sort of wondered during the course of writing the book and then editing it, I was like, can I get away with this? Am I going to be allowed to have my Jane 1 and my Jane 2? And there they are, and I'm very happy. And they sort of rule the roost and rule the day. So yeah, and beyond that, a big old cast with lots of points of view. So yeah, a panoply of players.
Oh, are they? It's an absolutely fantastic cast of characters, and you have got away with it, Alex. Certainly, you have. It's brilliant.
Hooray for the Janes! Viva the Janes!
Hooray for the Janes! Now, are you writing a second book now? I mean, I wonder if whether you, I'm sure you are, but whether you can tell us anything about it. Is it set in the same time period or a different time period? What can you tell us?
Yeah, I finished the first pass of a book 2 that's set in the same world as the Housekeepers, that stars a fresh cast and a new dastardly scheme. So we're playing with a con this time, as opposed to a robbery. But yes, very much in the same vein as the Housekeepers. I loved this world and building this world. Yeah, you'd have to prize me from it.
Oh, lots to look forward to then, really. Wow. And we noted from your bio that you studied history at the University of York and wrote your dissertation on female power at royal courts. So would you ever consider writing a novel about female power at royal courts?
That's a really good question. I mean, so the honest answer is my dissertation feels like a million years ago, but I did absolutely love it. And it was focused on sort of gift exchange and property ownership and all sorts of political maneuverings around that at the late medieval court and early Tudor court. And I had an amazing time just going through the archives and trying to prove that there was really solid political activity going on and that feminine identity was able to actually move mountains in a court setting, whereas the sort of historiography said that women had no agency and therefore made nothing happen at court. And it was a real battle to get my supervisor to sort of sign off on this as a concept. So I was really pleased that I was able to find lots of said evidence. And therefore, I suppose, yes, part of me does think, oh, I'd love to go back 500 years and go play in that world. But, you know, others have sort of trod that ground so brilliantly and so epically that I think I would be slightly daunted, to be honest, to go back to the 1500s. I don't know. I feel like it's well traveled. Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a great idea. Yes,
it's an interesting world. Yeah, you should see.
And just before we ask you for your reading recommendations, Alex, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about your writing journey and how you came to be published, because you were on the Curtis Brown course, I think, weren't you, back in 2015? And was The Housekeepers the novel you were writing then, or was it something completely different?
No, it was completely different, actually. So you're right. I was on the winter 2015-16 course, the 3-month course, and we had some brilliant people in that group. We had Laura Marshall, wonderful Laura, who wrote Friend Request, and Eleni Kyriakou, who wrote She Came to Stay, and has a new book coming out this November, which sounds brilliant.
We've got her on actually in a few weeks. Yeah.
Do you? Oh, Eleni's terrific. She's phenomenal. So it was a really, really good group. But no, I was writing a sort of historical speculative blend, genre crossing again. And actually at that stage, I hadn't quite got the genres to glue together properly. I was sort of writing for myself, and I couldn't really position it in market terms. And I did send it out to agents, and I did have a few full requests, but it didn't go anywhere. And I sort of then started writing, I suppose, more straight historical fiction, but with a little bit of a twist. I'd been writing for years before that, and applying for and getting on Curtis Brown felt like a really big moment, because I suppose it was the first time I was in a room with 14 other people who took it as seriously as I did and were as ambitious as I was to get published. Learnt shed loads about the commercials and the business side of publishing, which was really invaluable. Learned so much about pitching. I don't know if they still do this, but in those days you had to pitch to Johnny Geller. You sort of sat in the boardroom and everyone had to do their one-line pitch. And I think I'd sort of keeled over. It was really hard. And actually I just didn't get it at all in those days. I didn't understand how to do it or how to construct a pitch in the slightest. And that, I suppose, has been a really big part of the journey. Is, over the years, as you read the bookseller and as you see things get announced and you sort of see the construction of how things can be condensed into that one line, you begin to sort of come up with concepts in that way. Of course, coming up with the concept is one thing, and then actually executing it feels like a whole other diabolical side of stuff. So there's been lots of trial and error along the way. And I suppose my journey, if I'm sort of really honest about it, is that I started to get better at the hook. Then I started to get better at the opening, but the rest was still an absolute bonfire. And then by the time I got to the Housekeepers, I thought, I've got the hook, I've got the concept, and I've got the proposition in my mind. And if I spoil this, I will never forgive myself. So I just have to get this absolutely as right as I can. And I took my time to then really try and just sort of hone that and then get my sort of agent letter and all the rest of that process as good as I could. But it's still just such a massive learning journey, and the book changed so much in the rounds of edits that then followed. So I guess, again, in a rambling and roundabout way to answer your question, the journey's felt like a very long and winding road. And I sort of hear and suspect that it will continue and remain so long into the future, I hope and pray.
But I really identify with what you said about joining the course, because I didn't do that course, but I did the Faber Academy course. Yeah. Being in a room with other writers who do take it seriously, it's a huge thing, isn't it? And getting their feedback as fellow readers and writers on your work is phenomenal, isn't it? Yeah.
It is, and I often think that first evening, waiting for feedback is probably the most daunting thing that's ever happened on the publishing journey. I don't think sending the proofs out for the Housekeepers for the first time was as scary as waiting for Laura and Elodie and co to tell me what they thought of the first few pages of that first book many years ago. It sort of forces you to be accountable for what you're putting out there and to take that feedback on the chin and listen and then sort of adapt and try and learn and move forwards. But you're right, Lesley, it's such a sort of transitional moment where you're saying to yourself and others, I'm taking this really seriously.
Yeah. It's not necessary to do a writing course, is it? I think, they are quite expensive and they're very useful, and we both have obviously benefited from them, but I don't think they're essential. I think joining a good writing group and getting feedback that way is equally as beneficial, I think.
Yeah,
yes,
I
did like you, Alex. I did the Curtis Brown 3-month kind of course, but and it taught me an immense amount about the industry. I think having never worked in publishing before, or I didn't know anything about publishing, and from that point of view, it was absolutely invaluable. But I think, as Lesley, as you say, if you join a writing group, or if you have kind of other trusted authors or readers who are reading your work, then that can be, as good as well. So, yes. So finally, Alex, I guess we want to ask you, what are you reading right now? And is there anything that you would like to recommend to our listeners?
I'm in between books. So I just finished The Square of Sevens by Laura Shephard-Robinson, which was phenomenal. I've been saving it to be my sort of treat book for the end of summer, once I sort of finished book 2 and sent it all off and was like, hooray, I've done my job. And it lived up to the treat I was hoping
It's
for.
brilliant, isn't it? Yeah.
So good. She's so good. She's masterful. So I just absolutely adored it, which means I'm in between books. And I've just received this, which I can't wait to read. I don't know whether my camera's on Murrin.
Oh, yes.
It's Knife Skills for Beginners by Orlando Murrin. And I met Orlando at Harrogate this July. And it just sounds absolutely brilliant. It's a murder set in a cookery school in Belgravia. So, Belgravia, 1900s. Deliciousness. I mean, yeah, exactly. Obviously a contemporary story, but yeah, locked room and that sort of cozy angle. And from what I've seen in the opening pages, the prose is just really tight and really clean and really, really brilliant. So can't wait to dive into this one. Really looking forward.
I've read that one too. Yeah.
And how about you, Lesley? What have you been reading?
Well, I'm still trying to work my way through the oeuvre of Mick Herron, because I'll be interviewing him shortly. So I'm currently reading his latest, The Secret Hours. And obviously I've recently read The Housekeepers, which I've obviously waxed lyrical about, and that was a lovely, lovely moment of pure pleasure. What about you, Nikki?
Well, I've read recently a couple of absolute corkers. I have read a book called Night Watching by Tracy Sierra, who I think it's my editor, Harriet Borden at Viking, who is publishing her, and it's probably one of the best thrillers I have ever read. It's absolutely incredible. It's about a woman in a house in America who has 2 very young children and wakes up to realise that there's an intruder in her house. But it twists, and I won't give away any plot spoilers, but it's utterly fantastic, and I am incredibly jealous that I didn't write it. So it's one of those books. And then I've also just finished the new Lisa Jewell, None of This Is True, and absolutely brilliant again. Yes, fabulous, kept me utterly hooked, and all her books I think are amazing. So yeah, really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it.
I can't wait to read None of This Is True. I think Lisa Jewell is just absolutely a genius. I think she's amazing.
She is.
So, yeah.
This one's very, very, I just loved it. So yeah, very good.
And they've re-released her Then She Was Gone, and it's #1, hasn't it, in the chart?
I know. Phenomenal. Amazing. I loved that at the time. When I read that, I really loved it. It's one of my favourite ones of hers. So yeah, I'm really pleased they've re-released it.
There's one really, really chilling line in
Yes. Yes.
And you think, oh no. But yeah, if you haven't read it, go and read it. But that's very sadly, we've got to draw this to a close now, Alex. I think Nikki and I could go on chatting to you all day because you're so lovely and you've got such interesting things to say. But I'd really like to thank you for coming along today. And just to remind everybody that Alex Hayes' debut, The Housekeepers, came out this summer and is keeping its readers, including Nikki and me, glued to the pages.
Yes, it absolutely is. And congratulations, Alex, on a fabulous debut. We wish you every success with it and with all your novels to come. And in our next episode, we have our very first returning guest, and that's the wonderful Trevor Wood, who will be giving us the lowdown of everything he's learned about publishing in the last 3 years since his debut came out. And of course, before that, there'll be another mini-sode with the agent's assistant, Alice Hoskins, whose next topic is, I think it's the author-agent relationship. So, yeah.
It is, yeah, and it's a very interesting mini-sode, that one. I mean, they all are, but that particularly is. So make sure you tune in for that, and do get in touch across any of our social media channels if you have any topics you'd like us to cover in the future. Because it's hard coming up with these topics, isn't it? We want to do topics that you want to hear about. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, then please rate and review on whatever platform you're listening to us on. But for now, unfortunately, it's goodbye from Alex Hay.
Bye.
Goodbye from Nikki Smith.
Goodbye.
Goodbye from me.